Hi everyone, thanks for joining our webinar today, Take 30, Do You Really Know Recruitment Marketing? My name is Deirdre Pellerin and I'm the Senior Manager of Demand Generation here at Smashfly, and I'll be your host today along with the amazing Chris Brablc. We're really thrilled you've chosen to spend the next 30 minutes this afternoon with us to learn more about recruitment marketing. We have a ton of great content coming up, but first I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. If you have any technical difficulties with today's webinar, you can contact WebEx support at 1-866-229-3239, and I'll put that number into the chat window after my little intro here. You also have two options for connecting to audio today. You can either connect to the broadcast using your computer speakers, or you can connect via phone. And the dial-in info is available in the WebEx panel under Quick Start. So if you have any audio issues during the webinar, please refer to the Quick Start panel. And after the presentation, you'll have the chance to ask Chris your most burning recruitment marketing questions. And we encourage you to submit your questions throughout the webinar via the WebEx questions pane. We will not be monitoring the chat panel for questions, so please be sure you submit them in the questions panel. And we'll also be sending a recording of today's webinar as well as the slides via email after the event. And now I would like to introduce today's speaker. We have Chris Brablc, the Director of Recruitment Marketing here at Smashfly. Chris has been speaking about recruitment marketing best practices since he joined Smashfly back in 2009, and he now leads product marketing efforts here at the company. He was recently recognized as one of HR Examiner's top 25 online influencers in recruiting, which is a yearly list by industry analyst John Sumser. And Chris is also really active with the Candidate Experience Awards and currently serves as a council member for the organization. So without further ado, I will pass it on to Chris to get started. Chris?
Well, thank you, Deirdre, and I'm really excited to be here today. This Take 30 series is one that is going to be a lot of great content coming in the next, few months. It's a collective effort of conversations that we've had with prospects, with our customers, with influencers in the space, that we're asking a lot of questions around recruitment marketing. What is it? What are some tactics? How do we get started? A lot of great questions around just, trying to bring this into this discipline into their organizations. And so with this series, we're really looking to educate and bring kind of that recruitment marketing conversation to everyone to help them really think about how they can better attract the right talent to their organizations. And so with today's Take 30, we wanted to take a high-level look at the strategy and the processes that we can kind of look at from a recruitment marketing perspective. We're going to take a look at how it's evolved in the past 10 years. We're going to look at how it has a lot of similarities to a lot of the transformations that are happening to the marketing discipline over the last 5. We'll also look at, some of the things that we can be doing to start, look at in terms of short-term goals and long-term goals about bringing recruitment marketing into our organization. So to get started, I always like to start a conversation around recruitment marketing and how it's changed and how it's evolved over the past 10 years. So first and foremost, recruitment marketing, that term really started cropping up with job boards. And job boards came at a time when candidates didn't really know where to look for a job, and employers didn't really know where to find candidates for a job, especially with that internet revolution that was happening. And so job boards came and provided a marketplace for both candidates and employers to come together. And what we saw also was that all these job boards didn't want to just call themselves job boards. They wanted to use terminology that was a little bit more strategic. And so we saw enterprise marketers really think about that and then start using the term recruitment marketing, or marketing your jobs on different channels. And so we really saw a lot of organizations have a lot of early success with job boards. It was a really quick way to more quickly hire and more quickly find candidates for their jobs. But as we saw these channels become more and more popular and more successful for these organizations, we saw more jobs being posted, And we saw that candidates were getting frustrated with the number of companies that, and number of potential job opportunities that were available there. These job boards became saturated. And organizations were spending more and more money on each posting, and they were getting less and less benefit out of it. And so as organizations were looking at how can we actually attract these candidates better, they started to think about how do we build a marketplace ourselves, and one that's built around our brand and our value. And so we saw recruitment advertising and recruitment advertising agencies start to take that recruitment marketing moniker and bring it into what they can provide for organizations. And so we saw organizations start to invest in their career sites, invest in terms of the brand and the value that they're providing and how to get that out to the marketplace. And so we saw it kind of evolve from job boards to that recruitment advertising. And now over the last 3 or 4 years, we're seeing it just explode. Recruitment marketing and the terms that they ultimately can provide, the number of channels that we can use to attract and engage talent is just insurmountable at this point in time. And so now it's become about all these trends that we're seeing in the consumer world around social, around mobile, around all the different channels. Even from a job board perspective, we're seeing channels like niche job boards, other advertising locations, communities that are built around specific ideas. We want to tap all of those channels for talent. And so recruitment marketing has become a lot more of a science. How do we use all these different channels in our strategy, but how do we make sure that we do that so that it's consistent and that it's predictable? So all the things that we're doing that are actually attracting the right talent to our organization, we can do it over and over again as we're growing our organizations. And so as you think about recruitment marketing and kind of what is encompassed in that recruitment marketing, it's everything that is pre-application. So everything that you're touching and using to influence a candidate's decision to apply, whether it's your career site, talent community, your job marketing efforts on job boards, social media, your referral program. There are a lot of things that you probably see here on this slide that are incorporated in your strategy, and it's about how they all work together to get a candidate to a point where they understand the need that you guys solve, the value that you provide as an employer, and ultimately how all those interactions get them to ultimately raise their hand and say, hey, I want to work for your organization. And so when we're looking at recruitment marketing, one of the best parallels is looking at the marketing discipline and looking at how the marketing discipline has transformed, because this is a blueprint that has already been created. We're not starting from scratch when we're thinking about bringing recruitment marketing to talent acquisition. What we can do is now look at marketing and how it's evolved. And so when we look at marketing, they started to really think, hey, we need to get better from this from an analytical perspective. We need to start measuring all these interactions that are happening online. We need to start to look at these consumers and understand what we can provide to them that gets them to move down that funnel. Because at the end of the day, our goal is to get more customers, and the only way we get more customers is if we give our sales professionals the leads necessary so that they can convert them into customers. And so when we think about talent acquisition, we have a very ATS-centric view of the world today. We have, we're going to try to make as many hires as possible, and then we're giving our recruiters and saying, hey, let's assess these people and let's fill these jobs as soon as possible. But we're not doing a terribly good job of that top half, or that problem around how do we get more qualified applicants into that ATS so that our recruiters can do a better job of filling those job recs, of creating the better relationships with those candidates and with hiring managers so that we can be successful from a talent acquisition organization standpoint. And so when we look at, how can we kind of lift that veil that is existing today in a lot of our talent acquisition funnels, we need to start looking at different technologies, different skills that we can ultimately build within our own organizations so that we can attract more talent on a much more consistent and predictable basis. The other element here is that candidates are consumers. So all the trends that you see with consumers and marketers are transferring to talent acquisition. When a candidate goes and searches for a job, they're using the same search tactics that they use when they're buying a product or service. They're going to Amazon for reviews. They're searching Google for the best deals or for information on that supplier. And candidates are doing the same thing. They're looking at Glassdoor for reviews on that. They're tapping into their networks on LinkedIn. They're using word of mouth to figure out what's happening there. They're also going to your career site, viewing your content, viewing your videos. And so as we're kind of looking at this, we need to also make sure that we're not treating candidates like they're just, numbers in an ATS. They're people that are making decisions, and we need to treat them and fill a need for them when we talk about talent acquisition. And so as we're, from a marketing standpoint, as we're getting more and more data on all the candidates, what we ultimately saw back in 2012 was that a lot of the things and a lot of the channels that we were using and tactics we were using were becoming more and more costly to generate leads. So when, upper management goes and says, hey, we need more leads for our sales group, it was like, well, we need more budget for it. And it's like, well, we're not going to give you more budget to get more leads. And so you had to think more creatively. And so this whole idea around inbound marketing and, started to arise, which I'll go into a little bit later here. But that same problem is happening to talent acquisition today. We're seeing that recruiting is taking longer, that it's costing a lot more to be able to hire the same people. And so we're using budgets in very similar ways, but that same budget is not producing what it used to. And so for marketing, that was inbound marketing. That was the solution that a lot of organizations are putting into practice today. Inbound marketing is about earning the attention of customers. It's about making it easy to be found by customers that are looking for to solve specific needs. And it's about drawing these customers to your website through interesting content that you produce. And so really the biggest thing around inbound marketing that you see is that leads are 3 times more likely to convert in that funnel that we looked at earlier if you have compelling content that actually educates them. And so, if you're selling a service for recruiting like ourselves, we're creating a lot of great content around how can we make recruiting better. For recruit marketing, it's very similar. We need to leverage our content. We need to leverage all these different channels, and we need to start measuring this. And so recruit marketing, at its very simplest, is every tactic an organization uses to find, attract, engage, and nurture candidates and convert more of those qualified and interested leads into applicants. We want to make sure that the recruiters have all the qualified leads they need from a candidate perspective so that they can fill those jobs on the back end. And so the process of getting a candidate through to ultimately raise their hand to say, hey, I want to talk to a salesperson is very, very similar to a candidate that now comes through and raises their hand that says, I want to talk to a recruiter. I want to work for your company. And so when we're looking through that funnel and we're looking at kind of that process and what, inbound marketing is really all about, we see this funnel. And when you look at, and think about the last time you bought a product or service, you went through a really clear decision-making pattern and process to be able to make that decision, hey, I want to buy this product and service. So from not knowing you even had a need to ultimately having in your hand what you kind of got in the mail from a supplier, you went through that really clear decision-making process. And most likely, it was through engaging with content. And so you became aware of that organization. You might have became aware through a blog, through an email campaign, through a white paper that you were doing research on. You might have heard a friend say, hey, I really like this product. You should check it out. And you went to their website. You might attend a webinar like the one you're doing today to be able to educate yourself more on what you were interested in at that point in time. In most cases, and we've seen this with research that's been done, a consumer will have 12 different touch points before they ever make a buying decision. So they'll hit 12 different points here to make a much more educated decision on that. So all of these touch points are really important in terms of influencing that decision to buy that product and service. What's also interesting here is that 75% of the decision to purchase a product is actually happening before they ever talk to a salesperson. And so a lot of the influence in that decision-making process is happening through all of these channels that marketers are controlling, are building, and ultimately driving. And so when we look at talent acquisition, a lot of that is very similar. When we look at that candidate journey, they're going through that same decision-making process of, hey, maybe I want to look around here. What companies might be a good place for me to be if I want to grow my career? I wonder what some of my friends are doing and going through that. Ooh, okay, how do they treat their employees? How's the company culture? And so they're going through all these different questions as they're moving down this funnel. And all these questions should be being asked in the content that you're producing at each stage of this funnel. Your job ad should be answering what type of jobs that you have. It should be answering what type of company you are and why you're valuable. You have, your employees, which are some of your best advocates there, but they should be answering questions for candidates as they're going through that process. Sites like Glassdoor, you should be participating in that because people use that information to be able to make a decision on where they want to work. And so there's all this content that is being interacted with, and a lot of it also occurs on your career site that is influencing a candidate's decision to apply. And we want to make sure that all that content and all those touch points, we can track that and understand those so that we understand the content that we should produce more of so that we get more candidates through the door and into our application process. And so when we look at that talent acquisition funnel, there's two distinct disciplines to being really successful in getting more hires in the organization. First and foremost is recruiting. And recruiting is, recruiters are focused on finding, assessing, building relationships with the right candidates and building relationships with the hiring managers. But at the end of the day, they're really focused on selling. If I give an offer to a really qualified applicant that comes through the door, will they accept? Because that's what you want a good recruiter to do. But a good recruiter is only as good as the amount of leads and the quality of the applicants that are coming in. And so when we think about that kind of skill set of selling and the technology of selling that recruiting has, it's very process-oriented and it's very relationship-based. From a recruitment marketing perspective, it's about how do we actually engage and become part of that conversation? How do we make sure that all those interactions that are happening, how do we make sure that we're participating in those and we're offering those to candidates? But how are we tracking those as well and making sure that they're having a positive influence on a candidate within that candidate experience? So recruitment marketing's job at the end of the day, it's about finding, it's about attracting, it's about nurturing, but ultimately it's about converting and creating more quality applicants for that recruiting organization. So what I'll say here from a technology perspective, these are two very distinct disciplines. They require two distinct levels of skills or types of skills, and they require two different types of technologies. So from a recruiting standpoint, your ATS is really good from a compliance hiring process flow and being able to manage those relationships. Recruitment marketing requires systems that are a little bit more nimble and a little bit more tied to everything that you're doing to attract talent. And so systems like recruitment marketing platforms are really focused on being able to bring all those recruitment marketing activities together. And so when we think about, how do I bring recruitment marketing into our organization? How do I bring it into my strategy, and how do I get started? I wanted to break it into a few short-term and then ultimately long-term goals to be able to set up. From a short-term perspective, there are a few things that you can just get started with today. First and foremost is offering channels and offering abilities for candidates to opt in, to start a communication, start a dialogue with you that's not application process driven. I think the biggest mistake many organizations do is that they only offer jobs on their career site as a call to action. What we've seen is about 27% of the Fortune 500 actually offer any other type of call to action that says, hey, join our talent community, join our talent network. And what we also see is that the application process, over 74% of people who start an application drop off. And so what you're missing there is this huge amount of people that were engaged in your campaigns, were visitors to your career site, that ultimately you never capture, never know. So having a capture mechanism before the apply process is really, really important. Second is, let's drive additional awareness. So how are we doing today just in driving awareness to our jobs today? And that goes into point number 3 is we need to start measuring those folks, whether that's with short links or anything to that effect. We need to start measuring those and measuring those effectively. Some may use the ATS. We need to make sure that we're using all the source codes correctly, even if it's a really tough manual process to do. From a long-term perspective, it's now, okay, we've built those talent pipelines. We've started to capture those folks prior to the application process, and we're exponentially building our pipelines. How do we nurture those folks? What content do we have today that's not just job specific, although job alerts and stuff like that can be part of that process, but what content do we have that displays who we are and our value the value that we provide? It's about personalizing the candidate experience. So looking at that data around your career site and looking at how do we make this a better path for the candidates, the candidate audiences we're looking to attract. And then lastly, it's about leveraging that data even more effectively, not just from a budget standpoint of what's working and what's not, although that's really important, that's a great first step, but how do we leverage content better? How do we leverage messaging better? And how do we make sure that we're consistently doing kind of A/B testing around what is working and what's not, but in a way that's a lot more granular to all the campaigns and initiatives we're doing. And so, really at the end of the day, if we achieve those short-term goals and those long-term goals, what recruitment marketing will provide is a pipeline for every critical job family that we have and a pipeline of folks that are qualified and interested. And I think that last point is really, really important. And so think about the next time you have a job and you have a job for, a Java developer. If we've done recruitment marketing right, we've been able to help fill the jobs that are open just today. But if we've done our job right, hopefully we've gone and we have a pipeline for Java developers where we have a number of candidates that fit that qualified and interested stage in our CRM, and we can now tap into that first before we tap into anything else or spend any money elsewhere, from a recruitment marketing perspective. And so that's it for the first Take 30. What I can say is that we have a lot more great content to come. And so we will be sending out some messaging around the next Take 30 and when it is.
Thanks, Chris. Before we dive into the Q&A, I do want to mention that just as Chris mentioned, we'll be doing 2 more of these Take 30 webinars in this particular series. The next one will be on January 27th, and the topic will be developing a recruitment marketing strategy. And then our final Take 30 will be making your recruitment strategy happen. So please look out for invitations to both of those webinars. We also have another great webinar coming up next week on the 20th, including Tracy Parsons, our Director of Recruitment Marketing, and Madeline Lorano, an analyst with Aptitude Research. And they'll be discussing the 6 trends for recruitment marketing for 2016. It's going to be an awesome webinar. So without further ado, I will jump right into our Q&A here. We have a bunch of great questions coming in, Chris. The first one is related specifically to the talent acquisition funnel that you showed a couple slides back. Could you explain the difference between the interest stage and the consideration stage in the funnel?
Yeah, so when we think about the funnel is just a good way to conceptualize and think about kind of on a large scale how we're doing from a lead flow standpoint. And so interest to consideration is all around the decision-making process of that candidate and them actually starting to engage with the organization. So interest would be, somebody that goes from, is visiting your website, is starting to think about, hey, is this a good place for me to work? And consideration would actually be somebody that has taken an action of some sort. So they've followed you on social, they've joined your talent network, they've done something that shows, hey, there's a next level of interest, and they're actually considering you as an employer to potentially work for.
Great, thanks, Chris. Another question. This one seems to come up at almost every webinar, and we're getting it again here. So, is recruitment marketing owned by marketing, or is it owned by the talent acquisition department?
Yeah, it's a question that we get all the time, and I would, stress that it really should be owned by talent acquisition. Talent acquisition knows, what they need to ultimately market to. They know who they're looking for. There's just so much domain expertise there that it really needs to be owned by talent acquisition. And also the relationship between kind of, the people that are on the back end that are doing the assessment, the hiring manager relationship, the talent advisors, need to have a really good relationship with the team members that are doing recruitment marketing for any of this to work. So definitely owned by talent acquisition, and I think that's the best place for it.
Cool. Great. Thanks, Chris. I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions here. So what are some examples of companies that are doing recruitment marketing really well?
Yeah, there's some that come to mind. I think there's, Lockheed Martin, Sodexo does it really well. I know Pepsi, McKesson, Nestle Purina does really well. So I stress of just looking at some of their career sites, looking at some of the ways that they brand and message. They all do a really good job of engaging and answering the right questions for candidates throughout the process.
Cool. Great. I think we have time for one more, Chris. This one's kind of a two-part question. So the first part, how do you recruit internally so employees can get promoted from within? And also, how can you encourage employee referrals?
Yeah, so, I think the internal mobility question is, always a tough one. And so I think, when we're thinking about that, it'll be a lot of the same tactics that you would do from an external perspective, but obviously it'll be kind of a different lens around, how do you manage those relationships from hiring manager to hiring manager, and so it might be a little stickier in terms of how do we manage the relationships and the egos of taking one employee from one team to the next. And so, there probably has to be a different set of rules regarding that. But I would say a lot of the tactics can be very similar. From an employee referral standpoint, a lot of it's getting a buy-in from your employees early on in the process, making sure that you have access to their networks and that you're really encouraging them and giving them the proper method as well as the benefits of providing employee referral, a really good employee referral. And so, there's a lot of tools out there that help manage both of these processes. I know, at Smashfly, we have a tool that we just launched, which is employee referrals, which, really can help start managing that process and measuring that process a little bit better.
Great. Thanks, Chris. We are just at the bottom of the hour, so I want to thank everyone again for joining us today for our first part of the Take 30 webinar series. We will be sharing information to register for this next two webinars, as well as our 6 Trends for 2016 webinar next week. Thank you for joining, and we hope to see you at the next one. Bye-bye.